Hi friends, hope you are doing well and studying a lot at your place. So today I am going to discuss how to actually go about the handouts that I have provided you. That is a very quick and concise notes that I have given. But if you will go this way, how to read, then it will become even more easier for you. So if you see your handouts, okay, it's always better to mark the pages like from 1 to 34 I have marked, so that whenever I tell you that this page it is written, then you can quickly refer to that page. So if you start from 1, this will go up to 34. Okay, so if you start with the page 1, it is written what is actually conjunctiva. So conjunctiva, if you see, what is the meaning of the word conjunctiva? Conjunctiva word is formed from conjoin. Conjoin means to join. So actually conjunctiva joins two things. What two things? The eyelids and the eyeball. If this conjunctiva would not have been there, the eyelids and the eyeball would not be connected, and this connection is at most required because for the movements they should be acting as a one unit. Okay. Now second, we come to the parts of the conjunctiva. So if I draw here, see, this is suppose the upper eyelid, then we have the eyeball, and then we have the lower eyelid. Okay, so we have got actually three parts of conjunctiva. When I invert this eyelid like this, okay, so this conjunctiva is actually called as the palpebral conjunctiva. The conjunctiva that you can see from the front, this is bulbar. Now bulbar word has come from the bulb. Bulb means eyeball. The conjunctiva which is covering the eyeball, that is your bulbar. And at the pockets, which is where both the conjunctiva are actually joining each other, this are called as the conjunctival fornix. So first of all, be very clear about the parts of the conjunctiva. We have the palpebral conjunctiva, the bulbar conjunctiva, and then we have the conjunctival fornix. Okay. Now, the palpebral conjunctiva can further be divided into three parts. 1, 2 and 3. We have the tarsal conjunctiva, then we have the marginal conjunctiva, and then we have the orbital. Now these parts are important because like in trachoma, I will say that their follicles are first coming in the upper tarsal conjunctiva. So you should know what is this tarsal conjunctiva. So because we know that lid will have a tarsal plate. Okay, so the conjunctiva which is covering this tarsal plate, this will be called as tarsal conjunctiva. Okay, then we have anteriorly and posteriorly marginal and the orbital conjunctivas. So this was about the parts of conjunctiva. Now talking about the structure. Now conjunctiva actually consists of three layers. We have epithelium, then we have adenoid layer, and then we have the fibrous layer. So if I start with the epithelium, first of all, you should know what is the type of epithelium which is present here. The type of epithelium is the non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. Now what happens? This is non-keratinized whenever there is xerosis, there is dryness. This non-keratinized epithelium changes into keratinized. There is keratinization, and this is what we get in the vitamin A deficiency also. In the vitamin A deficiency, there is keratinization or hyperkeratosis. Some people also call it as metaplasia. Now you must be knowing this from your patho knowledge, that metaplasia means the change of epithelium. Now here what is happening? There is keratinization of the epithelium. From non-keratinized, it is becoming keratinized due to the deficiency of vitamin A. So what are the changes that takes place in the vitamin A deficiency? I can say keratinization, hyperkeratosis, or I can say there is a metaplasia. There are cells which are very, very important present in the epithelium, and these cells are called as the goblet cells. The goblet cells are basically present in all parts of the epithelium. Then we have a lot of questions asked on this goblet cells, like what is its purpose? Its purpose is mucin secretion, where they are maximum and where they are minimum. So they are maximum in the nasal bulbar conjunctiva, they are minimum in the upper temporal fornix, and nowadays we are even doing the stem cell therapy for those patients who have the deficiency of these goblet cells. I can give the stem cells, they can be differentiated into goblet cells, and this is how we can treat those patients who have excessively dry eye, like we have Sjogren syndrome, keratoconjunctivitis sicca. So goblet cells remains important. Now second layer is the adenoid layer. Adenoid layer is a layer which actually consists of follicles. So whenever I talk about the follicles, be it the viral conjunctivitis, be it the trachomatis conjunctivitis, these follicles will always be present in the adenoid layer. Okay, then the third one is the fibrous layer. Now what happens in the two layers, that is, one was your adenoid layer and another was your fibrous layer. Now together these two layers are called as substantia propria. So you should also know what is this substantia propria, because quite a many times this word is also used. Substantia propria means the two layers, adenoid and fibrous. And this is very important for the degenerative changes. Whenever there is some degeneration present in conjunctiva in the form of pingicula, in the form of pterygium, then it is always present in this substantia propria. So this was your page 1. Now coming to the number 2. Here they have given you the conjunctivitis. Conjunctivitis basically can be divided into two, infectious and non-infectious. So it is actually the infectious kind of conjunctivitis that is most common. Which infection? Bacteria. Which bacteria? Staph aureus. That is why most of the time we get yellowish sticky discharge. Okay, now if you look at here, the most common type of bacterial conjunctivitis, further this bacterial conjunctivitis can be divided in terms of the discharge that you are getting. So the most common is the acute mucopurulent discharge. Acute mucopurulent discharge. Now look at here, you must have got these images in the PDF form I had forwarded you. Okay, so you can relate to there. Acute mucopurulent conjunctivitis. Now can you see here, we have yellowish pus discharge, and a very typical history the patient will give, that there is sticking of the eyelashes, matting of the eyelids, patient is not able to open the eyes when he is waking up in the morning. So this is very, very typical of the acute mucopurulent conjunctivitis caused by Staph aureus. And obviously we will give topical antibiotics. Now because there is a lot of discharge, stickiness, we also go for the irrigation of conjunctival sac. But don'ts are more important here in comparison to the do's. The things that you should not do, what should be the don'ts? So there are something that you should never do here. The first is the padding and bandaging. Never do padding and bandaging in cases of the infectious conjunctivitis, because if you are doing that padding and bandaging, we are converting the conjunctiva in an incubator. You are increasing the temperature and the flora will flourish inside. So never do padding and bandaging. Number 2, the steroids. Obviously you don't have to give the steroids, and this again I will lay a emphasis, because all of you will not become ophthalmologists in the future, and because of this practice in India, that every person will first go to a physician before going to the specialty. So even if you are prescribing an eye drop, okay, and you are not an ophthalmologist, please don't give steroids. You can take an antibiotic, otherwise even we should not give the antibiotics, because resistance is soon to occur. But even if you are forced and you have to give, no other facilities there at that time, please don't give anything beyond the antibiotic. Steroids can cause disaster. and even corneal perforation can occur, because you never know that how many times the patient is going to instill, how many people they are passing to. So steroids should not be given. And the third thing is the frequent irrigation. Like you have to irrigate the conjunctival sac, but don't do very very frequently, because by that you are washing away the protective lysozymes which are present in the tears. So you can do it occasionally but not very very frequently. Other important thing in this acute mucopurulent conjunctivitis is the colored halos. If you remember, I keep on talking about the DDs, okay, and we were talking yesterday also about this. So colored halos are a very very important thing. Colored halos always means three important things. What? One was cataract. Okay, one was cataract. Then second is the acute congestive glaucoma, and third is this acute mucopurulent conjunctivitis. So whenever I talk about colored halos, whenever you get a question on colored halos, the first thing that you should think about is this acute mucopurulent conjunctivitis, the cataract, or the acute congestive glaucoma, and that is how you can keep on decreasing the wide range that you can think about after the question, how to approach that question. Then you can see whether it is a case of discharge conjunctivitis, or they're telling about your optic disc triad, or they are telling you about the narrowing of angle, or they are telling you about the cataract. Then you also have the Finchem's test. They must have told you something about the Finchem's test if they want to differentiate between the cataract and the acute congestive glaucoma. So this is how you have to go to the final diagnosis. So this was your mucopurulent conjunctivitis. Next is your purulent. Now what is the difference? Mucopurulent and purulent. Mucopurulent means we have mucoid plus we have pus, but the other one is purely purulent. Just purulent means only pus discharge. So obviously this is more dangerous, caused by a more virulent bacteria. And what is that bacteria? Gonococcus. Now we know that this gonococcus is also responsible for the systemic manifestations, like we have urethritis, we have arthritis, we can have a history of gonorrhea, gonococcal infection, and this is one conjunctivitis where we have systemic manifestations. That is why the only conjunctivitis where we prefer giving systemic antibiotics also, that is your this purulent conjunctivitis. Then next important thing, you will study this in the topic of cornea, that some of the bacteria can invade the intact corneal epithelium, and Neisseria gonorrhoeae is one of them. So whenever the patient is having this gonococcal conjunctivitis, we always have a risk of this corneal involvement. So there are certain things which will always specify you or point towards the gonococcal infection, urethritis, arthritis, corneal involvement, severe involvement, lot of chemosis, lot of congestion, bilateral involvement, purulent discharge. You will learn this all within this topic only. Then next is the acute membranous. Now look at here. This is actually the membranous conjunctivitis. Can you see a membrane here? Now just looking at the membrane, I cannot say whether it is a true membranous conjunctivitis or it is a false membranous conjunctivitis. So they have to tell you this in the question itself, that whether bleeding is present or not. If the bleeding is present, that means membrane was densely adherent, and that means it's a true membranous. If there is no bleeding, that means it was loosely attached, and loosely attached means false membranous. So this is the important catch point that you have to do in the questions related to the membranous conjunctivitis. I have given you the list, those which can cause the true membranous conjunctivitis and those which can cause the false membranous or the pseudo membranous. So you have to go for it. Then next is the angular conjunctivitis. Now what do you mean by angles? Angles like at the canthus here. So can you see here? We have this excoriation which is present here. So whenever we have this angular conjunctivitis, this is actually caused by the Moraxella Axenfeld. This is caused by Moraxella Axenfeld. It is also called as diplobacillary conjunctivitis. Most of the time, the question that is asked about it is the treatment of choice, because in every conjunctivitis, usually it is the antibiotic which is the treatment of choice. But here you will see that it is the zinc that is the treatment of choice. Now, what is the reason? Because this bacteria releases a proteolytic enzyme. That proteolytic enzyme will get accumulated in the tear film. And when it gets accumulated in the tear film, especially at the angles, it will cause the eczema. Eczema, or I can say dryness, the excoriation is occurring in the epithelium. Now, this epithelium can be in the conjunctiva also, in the lids also, and in the skin also. So, if you see here in this area, we have all the three present: conjunctiva also, the lid also, and the skin also, and that is why whole of this area is excoriated. Now, why we are preferring the zinc here? The reason is that here we have a problem with the epithelium, and zinc helps in epithelial healing. That is why the treatment of choice here is actually zinc. So this was your angular conjunctivitis. Now coming to the next one, that is your viral conjunctivitis. Now viral conjunctivitis is basically quite a lot different from the bacterial conjunctivitis. Here we can have acute follicular conjunctivitis. Basically, bacteria do not produce follicles. So if you are getting the follicular conjunctivitis, we think of the viral conjunctivitis, or we think about the trachoma. Now, about the follicular conjunctivitis, see, I have divided into two. One is epidemic keratoconjunctivitis, and second is your pharyngoconjunctival fever. Now, epidemic means like adenovirus is very, very notorious for causing the epidemics. You must have heard about the epidemics that we commonly call as flu, that spreads in hostels, schools, colleges, societies. So that is actually caused by adenovirus. The species are different here. This is caused by 8, 19 and 37, while the pharyngoconjunctival fever, like we have got pharyngo means pharyngitis, that is sore throat, conjunctivo, that is conjunctivitis, we have watering, and then we have fever. This is the typical viral fever. So this is caused by 3, 4 and 7. So you have to learn these subspecies, but always remember that adenovirus is the most important thing. Now the second is the acute hemorrhagic conjunctivitis. This is a typical picture of acute hemorrhagic conjunctivitis. Acute hemorrhagic conjunctivitis, can you see here? And I will show you the hyphema also and subconjunctival hemorrhage also, so that you can differentiate what is acute hemorrhagic conjunctivitis, what is the hyphema, what is the subconjunctival hemorrhage. This is the typical acute hemorrhagic conjunctivitis, very, very typically found in cases of viral conjunctivitis. Only there is one bacteria which can produce the hemorrhages, and that one bacteria is the pneumococcus. Otherwise, if I am saying the hemorrhagic conjunctivitis, that means I am talking of the viral conjunctivitis. This is also called as Apollo conjunctivitis. Okay, so this is asked quite many times. You should know this is picoRNA virus family, especially the antivirus type 70. This was asked in DNB June 2018 also. There's asked the subspecies of antivirus, that is type 70. Then we have adenovirus, we have COX-24. So always they asked all except, or they can ask you the most common. Most common is the picoRNA virus family, especially the enterovirus type 70. Okay, now see this. This is actually the hyphema. Can you see? This is the hyphema. Hyphema means the blood in the anterior chamber. Whenever we have the blood inside the anterior chamber, the cells will settle at the bottom. So hyphema is this. While if you see this, this is actually the subconjunctival hemorrhage. So can you see there is a difference in the subconjunctival hemorrhage? Here you can see the posterior limit is also visible. Okay, this means the trauma has occurred in the eyeball, because if it is a orbital fracture or orbital perforation, then you are not able to see this posterior limit. This was your hyphema. Then see this is a chemosis. What is chemosis? Chemosis means the edema of the conjunctiva. Edema. Can you see the ballooning of the conjunctiva that you can see here, shiny? This is actually called as the chemosis. So going back to this, while this was your hemorrhagic conjunctivitis. Then third is the herpes simplex. This is a very mild, watery kind of conjunctivitis. Usually you must have noticed that whenever we have the viral fevers, just watering is present. That is your typical viral conjunctivitis. Okay, now coming to the next, that is your trachoma. Now trachoma is one disease that you are studying so many places, like we study this in micro also, and we are studying here also. PSM people are also telling, because this is one of the components of your Vision 2020 program. And why trachoma is so important? Because it is one preventable cause of blindness in India. It is the most common infection which can cause blindness in India, that is trachoma. So this is caused by chlamydia trachomatis. We have A, B, BA and C. This is causing the blinding trachoma. That trachoma that is responsible for the blindness, while the species which are from D to K, the D to K, these are responsible for inclusion conjunctivitis. Inclusion conjunctivitis means non-venereal spread, that is from genitals to the eye. Now, if it is occurring in the adults, this is called as swimming pool conjunctivitis, because in the swimming pools, the spread is very, very common from your own infected genital secretions or the other ones, if the properly water is not disinfected. So in that case, this can occur. This is called as swimming pool conjunctivitis. While in neonates, from the mother genital to the baby, this can also occur. That is called as neonatal inclusion conjunctivitis. So another important thing is your swimming pool conjunctivitis. Okay. Now we come to the signs and symptoms. Now, because trachoma is a chronic keratoconjunctivitis. Chronic keratoconjunctivitis. It's a chronic condition. Kerato, it involves the cornea, conjunctivitis, the conjunctiva. So it is the conjunctivitis which is involving both cornea as well as conjunctiva. Another important thing is that here we get the mixed response. Now, what do you mean by mixed response? Mixed means we have follicles also, and we have the papillary hyperplasia. Follicles are very, very important in cases of trachoma. Usually the follicles start from the upper tarsal conjunctiva as well as the fornix area, and these follicles, one thing more, because many people ask me what I have written this G, E and ME. I thought that you will recognize this. This is gross examination and the microscopic examination. Okay. So the follicles that you are getting in trachoma are very, very typical. These are called as the sago grain follicles. I hope you know what are sago grains. Sago grains are the sabudana, and whenever we boil those sabudana, they are looking like pearls. So similar is the kind of follicles that you are getting in the trachoma. Just like that, these are called as the sago grain follicles. Again, follicles will be present in the adenoid layer. Now suppose you are seeing the follicles and you have a doubt whether these follicles are from trachoma or from any other follicular conjunctivitis, then we can go for this microscopic examination. On the microscopic examination, you will get typical Leber cells. Leber cells, which are the large multinucleated cells, plus you will also get the signs of necrosis. So if you are getting this, you are sure that these follicles are due to the trachoma. Apart from this, even from sago grain appearance, plus the other things also you will have that will make it sure that this is actually a case of trachoma. Second thing is the papillary hyperplasia. Now first of all, try to understand what is actually the papillae. If you invert the upper eyelid like this, there you will get small blood vessels like this. These are actually called as papillae. So what happens in cases of trachoma, there is lot of hyperplasia in these papillae. They will become reddish, flat topped. Reddish, flat topped, velvet like appearance is present. This is actually called as papillary hyperplasia. So we have the sago grain follicles also, and we have the papillary hyperplasia. Both are present Now, because these are the signs of inflammation, and you already know whenever we have inflammation, we will have fibrosis. Now, see, this is again pathology, and I told you that every subject is integrated with the ophthalmology. In ophthalmology, we'll be talking about every subject, the micro, patho, and everything. So here now inflammation has occurred. Now, after the inflammation, fibrosis will be there. This fibrosis, when typically found in the sulcus subtarsalis. Sulcus subtarsalis, then it is called as the Art's line. Sulcus, you know already what is sulcus. Subtarsalis, a very fine sulcus is present below the tarsal plate, that is called as sulcus subtarsalis. If you are getting fibrosis exactly there, that is called as Art's line. Now remember here, important thing, we were also having the Art's triangle. Art's triangle is found in the acute anterior uveitis. So like this is the way how to revise anything. Like if you are studying Art's line, think about Art's triangle. When you are studying the Art's triangle, think about Art's line. Oil droplet reflex, oil droplet cataract. Shield ulcers, shield cataract. So same names, so many things are there. And then see this, the next one is your concretions. What are these? Can you see very dirty looking these things which are present here? These are actually the concretions, the dead cells and the debris which is accumulated here in the palpebral conjunctiva. These are called as concretions, and when this patient will close the eyelid, these concretions will rub the cornea, corneal erosion. And you know that whenever there is corneal erosion, there is always a risk of secondary bacterial infection. So there can be bacterial corneal ulcer, and the only complication of the trachoma is the corneal ulcer. How, ma'am? There are so many things which are occurring in trachoma, because the other things are just the sequelae. Complication is one thing that is leading to blindness. So blindness is occurring only due to corneal ulcer leading to corneal opacity. Other things are just the sequelae. Okay, so concretions is one thing that can lead to corneal erosion and that can lead to corneal ulcer. Okay, now the next page. Coming to the corneal things, what are the things that can occur in the cornea? The things that we have in the cornea, now similar to the Sago-grain follicles that were found in the conjunctiva, we are having the same follicles in the cornea also. Now here these are called as Herbert follicles. Here they are called as Herbert follicles. The follicles are just the same gross appearance, Sago-grain appearance, same microscopic appearance, the Leber cells, and we have the signs of necrosis, but here they are called as Herbert follicles. Now when these follicles heal, there will be small pit-like things which are left near the limbus. These are called as Herbert pits. Again, a very, very important MCQ. Herbert pits are found in the trachoma. Now, the question is that why we were not getting the pits in the conjunctiva, but we are getting the pits in the cornea? Because the reason is pretty simple. Cornea is avascular. Conjunctiva there were no pits, but here you are getting pits. So both Herbert follicles and Herbert pits are found in the trachoma. Then the next important thing is the pannus. Now pannus is again a thing which is very, very typical found in trachoma. Can you see these blood vessels which are coming over the cornea? So cornea is actually avascular. Now because there is a keratoconjunctivitis which is occurring in trachoma, these vessels grow over the cornea. Now when these vessels are growing over the cornea, they are also bringing the inflammatory cells. So we have these inflammatory cells. Along with this, we have got the vessels which are coming, and mostly it is the superior side that we are getting the vessels first, because the trachoma follicles are also present on the superior side first. So it is the superior side that it is involving first. So another important thing is this pannus, and because pannus contains both the vessels as well as inflammatory cells. So this is another thing that can lead to corneal ulcer. Concretions can lead to corneal ulcer. Pannus can also lead to corneal ulcer, because ulcer means what? It is the break in the continuity. So obviously if the vessels are growing, inflammatory cells are growing, they will be embedding deep, and that can lead to the ulcer. Okay. Then coming to the WHO classification of the trachoma, the Fisto classification. Earlier there were so many classifications of the trachoma, and that is why if you go for the very old MCQs, you will even get a questions asked on the other stagings of the trachoma. But don't follow that, because now we are following just the Fisto classification. So we have to see that. See, this is the appearance of a normal tarsal conjunctiva. Can you see very fine papillae are also present there? So first is the follicular. F is the follicular. Follicular means if you are having at least 5 follicles of the size 0.5 or more, then this is called as the follicular stage. You know everything about the follicles, the Sago-Grim follicles, the Leber cells, the signs of necrosis. Then next is I. I is the intense. We are having the intense inflammatory thickening. We are having papillary hyperplasia, that we also know. Then third is S. S for scarring. Scarring means we have fibrosis, and especially if it is taking place in the sulcus subtarsalis, then that is called as arch line. Look at here, we are just getting a very fine line here. That is called as the arch line. Then next is T. T is for trichiasis. Now what is the meaning of the trichiasis? Trichiasis means when the eyelashes are rubbing the cornea, and usually it is secondary to the entropion also, because we are also having the entropion in the trachoma, inward turning of the eyelid margin. So when there is an inward turning of eyelid margin, the eyelashes start rubbing the eyeball, that is the cornea. And how many eyelashes we require? Even if one eyelash rubs the cornea, it is sufficient to call it as trichiasis. If these eyelashes keep on rubbing the cornea, then that can also lead to the corneal ulcer. So can you see, so many things are there which can lead to corneal ulcer, which is the complication, and that can lead to corneal opacity finally. O means opacity, which will lead to the diminution of vision. See here. So corneal opacity, especially that corneal opacity I am talking about, that can diminish the vision. That means that is causing the obstruction of pupillary axis. Okay. Then we have got the safe strategy. Now again, so many questions on the safe strategy, and you have to be very specific for this, because here S means the surgery for the lid deformity, especially the trichiasis. Many a times you will see some people write screening, sanitation, so many things, but it just means the surgery. You can't change it. A is for antibiotics. F for we have got the facial cleanliness and the environmental hygiene. See, these are the things that you have to just follow as it is. You cannot change the word as per your wish. So that is another thing. Next important thing is the ophthalmia neonatorum. Ophthalmia neonatorum. Now what is the meaning of this? Ophthalmia, this is conjunctivitis. Neonatorum. Neonatorum means in the neonates. Neonate means up to 28 days. So whenever we are having bilateral conjunctivitis in a neonate, specifically speaking 28 days, then I will say that this is a case of ophthalmia neonatorum. Now usually what kind of questions you have to attempt on this ophthalmia neonatorum is the DD. Like this, they will say that so many hours or so many days of birth a child is coming. So first of all, you have to suspect this ophthalmia neonatorum by any kind of discharge. Even if watering is present, you have to suspect the ophthalmia neonatorum, because tears are not formed till 28 days. Tear formation takes place between 4 to 6 weeks. So even if watering is there, you have to suspect. Like sometimes the baby is having congenital dacryocystitis. They will also come with watering, with recurrent discharge. So you have to keep ophthalmia neonatorum also in mind. One thing is that. Now broadly, we can divide these babies into two parts. Those which are presenting less than 48 hours and those which are presenting more than 48 hours. Now, sometimes you are in a dilemma. If they say that baby is presenting at 48 hours, then you have to look at the signs and symptoms. Obviously, this is for the broad classification. So, less than 48 hours, more virulent things, and after 48 hours, lesser virulent things. Now, if the baby is presenting in the first 48 hours, there are basically two things. One is the chemical conjunctivitis, and second is your gonococcal conjunctivitis. Now, what do you mean by chemical? Chemical conjunctivitis, it is not that common nowadays, but previously there was a method used, Creed's method. There we used to instill 1% silver nitrate solution in both the eyes of the baby as soon as the baby was born, so that we can prevent the ophthalmia neonatorum. We were not having so many antibiotics at that time. Gonorrhea was quite common. So this was a practice that we used to instill 1% silver nitrate solution. So some babies used to give some reaction to this, and that was called as chemical conjunctivitis, and it usually presents within 6 hours. Now, how to differentiate? Differentiate means it is presenting earlier, plus it's very mild. Usually you do not get any congestion, no chemosis. It can be unilateral also, like watery kind of discharge. But on the other hand, if the baby is presenting in the first 48 hours with the severe congestion, chemosis, bilateral involvement, purulent discharge, as you can see in this baby, then it is not a case of chemical, then it is a case of gonococcal conjunctivitis, and obviously you have to give the treatment for it. Now, how to treat? If the baby is having chemical conjunctivitis, stop that chemical at once. You can do the irrigation of conjunctival sac to remove that chemical. Otherwise, you don't have to do any active intervention. But on the other hand, if the baby is having gonococcal conjunctivitis, you have to give what you call as the BAC therapy. BAC, BAC therapy. B is bacitracin eye ointment. A is for atropine. Now, why we are giving atropine? This is for the corneal involvement, because I know that gonorrhea can cause the corneal invasion. So if you are getting the corneal involvement, you will give this atropine ointment. And then C is the ceftriaxone. Ceftriaxone injection we are giving IM route. This is for the systemic manifestations. Now, if the baby is presenting after 48 hours, we can have other bacteria, staph, strep. Then you can give the broad spectrum antibiotics. We can also have herpes simplex. Now, most of the times we do not require antivirals for this, but if you feel like, you can give the 3% acyclovir eye ointment. And then we have the chlamydia trachomatis D2K, that is causing the neonatal inclusion conjunctivitis. Now, in NEET 2018, there were 2 questions that were asked from the neonatal conjunctivitis at a time. So what were they? I have given you this. First of all, they asked the most common cause of neonatal conjunctivitis, and they also asked the most severe cause. The most common cause is this chlamydia trachomatis in India, and the most severe, if they ask, is the gonococcal, which is responsible for the blindness also. So this was about the trachoma. Now coming to the next one, that is your allergic conjunctivitis. Now we have talked about the infectious conjunctivitis. Now we are coming towards non-infectious. In the non-infectious, the most common is the allergic. In the allergic, the most common is the VKC. VKC means the vernal keratoconjunctivitis. So keratoconjunctivitis, you already know that it is involving the cornea, it is involving the conjunctiva, and vernal means the spring. So basically it is also called as spring catarrh, but you should know that this is actually a misnomer. It is not common in spring season, it is common in hot and humid climate. But earlier it was believed that it is common in the spring season. That is why the tradition continues and its name continues, spring catarrh and vernal keratoconjunctivitis. So this is a very typical, always remember, a young male, okay, in a hot and humid climate, between the age group of 5 to 15 years, is a typical patient coming to you with the recurrent episodes. It is bilateral, it is recurrent, it is interstitial. Interstitial means it is involving even the deeper layers. With the periodic reoccurrence, every time this season will come, the patient will start showing the symptoms with a self-limiting resolution. This season passes off slowly, the symptoms will also decrease. So this is showing a periodic reoccurrence, and the typical complaint of this patient will be intense itching. You must have noticed also, like some of the boys sitting in front may be having the similar complaints. Whenever there are the seasons of a hot and humid climate, we start usually having these symptoms from May, June, July, depending upon the area and the zone of India that you are residing. and up to like August and mid of September, the complaints are there. There is intense itching, burning, then we have gritty sensation. This is the foreign body sensation, and a very very typical discharge that is called as the ropey discharge. Ropey discharge is again a very typical discharge, and this is a catch point. If you are getting a ropey discharge in your question, again you are very very sure that they are talking about VKC. Ropey discharge means the stingy discharge, like we have like rasgulla ki chashni jaisi, like more the patient tries to remove it, it becomes stingy rope like. So patient always complain ki taar jaisa pada rehta hamari eyes mein. This kind of discharge is that. So it is very very problematic, and you, because of the very thick discharge, even it causes the blurring of vision. Okay, now if you do the examination of this patient, you will get keratoconus and conjunctivitis. You will have the signs that is present in cornea also, and they will be present in the conjunctiva. So I'll start with the conjunctiva. So first start with the palpebral conjunctiva. Typical polygonal raised areas. You will get the polygonal raised areas in the conjunctiva. Polygonal, like they can be hexagonal also, and they can be pentagonal also. So we have got the different kind of things they are presenting, and sometimes that much of raised areas hyperplasia takes place that the patient is not able to close the eyelid even. So even exposure dryness takes place. Can you see this? This is a very very typical feature that you are getting, exactly like this you are getting, and this is called as the cobblestone papillae. This is called as the cobblestone papillae. So exactly like this kind of a picture, very very specific of VKC. It is that much specific that they can give you this and they can just ask you the spot diagnosis also. So this is the cobblestone papillae that you get in the patients. Then we can also get the grayish white spots. These grayish white spots that you are getting on the outer side of the limbus, these are actually called as the Horner-Trenta spots. Horner-Trenta spots. Sometimes they even call it as just the Trenta spots. Neat people are very fond of asking this. They are grayish white in color, and basically they are showing the collections of the eosinophils. Another important question is that they are the collections of the eosinophils because it is a type 1. Mainly it is type 1 hypersensitivity reaction, IgE mediated, in response to the exogenous allergens. So whenever this patient comes in contact with the dust, dirt, smoke, pollutants, anything that he is allergic to, mast cell are degranulated, they are releasing the histamine mediators, and they are having all sort of complaints. So this is very important. Third important thing, sometimes you may confuse it with the Herbert pits. So be very very clear, Herbert pits were dark blackish in color, grayish. They were inside the limbus. They are grayish white in color. They are outside the limbus, and they are collections of eosinophils. They were found in trachoma, while these are found in VKC. So you should be very very clear about it. Then talking about the cornea. Now in the cornea also we have the involvement in cases of VKC, and this kind of a picture that you get, this is the typical called as the shield ulcers. These are called as the shield ulcers. So again, remember, shield ulcers are found in VKC, while the shield cataract is found in the atopic dermatitis. Okay, now if you talk about the treatment, because it's type 1 hypersensitivity reaction in response to the exogenous allergens, you can try the topical antihistaminics, the mast cell stabilizers. Then you can give the this sodium chromoglycate, ketotifens, and lubricating drugs. And usually what we are giving is the olopatadine. Olopatadine is the drug of choice. The reason is that it is giving you the combined property, both antihistaminic as well as a mast cell stabilizer. So this is considered to be the drug of choice nowadays because it is giving you both the acute as well as the chronic protection. Now, why not steroids? Obviously, steroids are very good because they are anti-inflammatory also, anti-fibrotic also, anti-allergic also. And here we have inflammation also, we have fibrosis also, we have allergy also. But we also know about the GTCS, that is the topical steroids have a problem of causing glaucoma, systemic steroids more have a problem of causing cataracts, and this is one disease where I have to give a long-term treatment because this is going to last for about 10 years. So that is why I don't want to give the steroids at the earliest. If these drugs are not acting, only then I give the steroids. Second important thing is that we always start with the weaker steroid. So usually we start with the fluorometholone. This is the usual steroid we give, very popular drug come by the trade name of FML also. So this fluorometholone is the weakest steroid, and it's a good drug as far as your allergic conjunctivitis is concerned, but as far as side effects are concerned, they are lesser. So we usually start with this, but otherwise if it is not showing the effects, we may have to go even to the prednisolone. We have got the low dose prednisolone eye drops like Lotipred, that is available. Then we may have to go to the high dose also. So this was about the VKC. Now coming to the other one. So turn your page. There you'll get the Philippi-Muller keratoconjunctivitis. Now Philippi-Muller keratoconjunctivitis, this has come from the word phyllectin. Phyllectin means what? Phyllectin means a nodule. So another kind of allergic conjunctivitis is the nodular keratoconjunctivitis, where actually we have a typical nodule. Can you see here? This is a typical nodule. Very small pinkish nodule present near the limbus, that is there. And this is very, very different from the VKC. Like, let us see what are the main differences. That was diffuse conjunctivitis. This is a nodular conjunctivitis. That was more common in males. This is more common in females. Then that was to the exogenous allergens. This is to the endogenous allergens. That was type 1 hypersensitivity reaction. This is type 4 hypersensitivity reaction. So there are so many things that you will get here which are quite different, and usually we get this small nodule. Now this nodule will break up over the limbus, and this will give you the ulcers. You will get so many ulcers, like I have written the sacrophilus ulcer, the fascicular ulcer, and miliary ulcer. Now what is the meaning of this? Let me tell you that also. Suppose in the beginning we have a ulcer here, like we were having a small nodule here, it has broken down, and we have a small ulcer. So the ulcer I am drawing with the yellowish part, we have this small ulcer. This is your sacrophilus ulcer. Now slowly and gradually what will happen, the blood vessels will grow over it. So when we have got the parallel leash of blood vessels which are growing over it, this is called as fascicular ulcer. Fasciculi means bundles. And then we will have the ulcers which are spreaded all over the cornea. So this is the diffuse miliary ulcer. This is the difference between sacrophilus ulcer, then we have fascicular ulcer, where we have the leash of blood vessels, and the miliary ulcer. Okay, because here we have the endogenous allergy, so obviously here the treatment will be steroids. According to the cause, you may add, if you feel like because this patient having Philippi-Muller keratoconjunctivitis can be a patient of tuberculosis. Tubercular proteins are very, very common. Earlier it was believed that the most common cause of this endogenous allergy was tuberculosis, but now they say that it is staph proteins. So if you feel like that it is staph proteins, then give the broad spectrum antibiotics. If you feel like it's a tuberculosis patient, feel like means from the evidence and manifestations, then you have to start even the ATT. Then finally we come to the degenerations. The degenerations, as I told you, are found in the substantia propria, and we have mainly two kind of degenerations. One is the pingicula and another is pterygium. So look at here. First, if I talk about the pingicula, in the pingicula we just have the discoloration. We do not have the growth. We have the discoloration, and this is due to the elastotic degeneration of the substantia propria. It is a stationary condition, and even if it grows, now though it is a stationary condition, suppose I say it is growing, then you will see that the apex is away from the cornea. So that is why even if it will grow, it will not grow over the cornea, and therefore it is considered to be a mild disease. At times it can act as a precursor of pterygium, but otherwise in itself it is not causing any problem. Most of the times the problem is of cosmesis. because anybody don't like the yellowish discoloration of the eye. So that is the only problem. Otherwise we do not have any problem, and therefore we do not give any treatment. Now as far as the laterality is concerned, both pterygium as well as pingicula can be bilateral, and because earlier the males were more present outside, because this is more prone to occur in those patients who are open field workers, more exposed to the sun, smoke, pollutants. That is why it has a preponderance towards the male. Plus the nasal side is affected earlier than the temporal side. So these are the things which are very, very important. While if you look to the other thing, this is a pterygium. Now what is the difference between the pingicula and the pterygium? Pterygium word is formed from the word pterygos, wing shape. So here we have a wing shaped fold of conjunctiva which is encroaching the cornea. So it is pressing the cornea. So due to this, it can lead to a problem called as astigmatism. This is again a very, very important thing. This was asked in NEET 2019 also, that what is the most common cause for the diminution of vision in the patients of the pterygium? This is astigmatism, and the astigmatism which is occurring here is with the rule astigmatism, means vertical curvature is more than the horizontal curvature. Now in that question, the other option was the obscuration of visual axis. The same picture was given here where there was no obscuration of visual axis, but suppose they give the obscuration of visual axis also, but then too, if they ask you the most common, the answer will be astigmatism, because every pterygium will press the cornea and cause the uneven surface and will cause the astigmatism, but every pterygium will not cause the obstruction of the visual axis. So this is again a very important point. Then another important thing is the Stocker's line that we get here. Stocker's line. These are again very fancy of the examiners, like we have the KF ring, we have Fleischer's ring, we have Stocker's line. Stocker's line, can you see in front of this arrow, we have got a brownish, very thin line. This is due to the iron deposition which is present anterior to the apex of the pterygium. This is called as Stocker's line. So nasal side appearing earlier. Plus, if you see here, when this pterygium is growing, its apex is towards the cornea. So if it grow, it will cause the obstruction of visual axis. So earlier the vision loss was due to astigmatism, but slowly and gradually it can cause the obstruction of visual axis, and that will cause even more diminution of vision. Nasal side occurring earlier than the temporal side, that is clear. And here obviously, because it is causing the symptoms, you have to give the treatment. Surgical excision is the best choice. Now when we do the surgical excision, the chances of recurrence are high, so you will have to give certain things in order to reduce this recurrence. So I have given you the list of the drugs, like we have mitomycin, thiotepa, you can give the beta radiations, we can even try the conjunctival autografting. Autografting means graft from the same person. You can take the conjunctiva and you can cover it. The reason is that I don't want to leave that area raw. Raw area will again lead to the development of pterygium, and every time there will be a regrowth. Obviously it will be wilder from before. Amniotic grafting is again a very good method. Then at the same time, look at here, this also. This at times may be confusing you with the pterygium, with the pingicula. So see this, can you see here, this is also triangular, but this is white foamy. If you see the color, these are the white foamy spots. So these white foamy spots that you can see are actually the Bitot spots. Bitot spots are the specific sign that you are getting in the vitamin A deficiency. Now again, be very, very particular. I am not saying that this is earliest sign. This is a specific sign. Okay, it is not earliest, it is the specific sign of the vitamin A deficiency. Here again, apex is away from the cornea. They are white foamy spots, plus they first occur on the temporal side. So there are so many things which will help you in differentiating between a pingicula, pterygium and the Bitot spots. Plus the age, the degenerative conditions are always more common in the elderly age group, while the Bitot spots will be more common in the children. Okay, so this finishes your conjunctiva. Now we'll start with the cornea. In the cornea, first I have given you the introduction. We all know that cornea is the anterior 1/6 of the eyeball. It is transparent, it is avascular. We have two surfaces, anterior surface and a posterior surface, and then we have two curvatures also, the horizontal curvature and a vertical curvature. Then I have told you about the different layers of the cornea. A very easy method is ABCDE. A for epithelium, B for Bowman's membrane, C for connective tissue stroma, then pre-Descemet's membrane, which is a newly invented membrane, then D is a Descemet's membrane, and then we have E. E is the endothelium. Every of the layer has its own importance. Epithelium is non-keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium, that is same as that of the conjunctiva. Bowman's membrane cannot regenerate. Connective tissue stroma is the maximum thickness, most 90% or even more than 90% of the thickness of the cornea is by this connective tissue stroma. Pre-Descemet's membrane, that is a newly invented membrane, very thin membrane, just 16 microns. Now it is considered to be the toughest layer. Earlier the toughest layer was the Descemet's membrane, but if it is asked by you people, your answer will be now pre-Descemet's membrane. Plus, when they ask you the layers of the cornea, don't say 5 now. For you people, it is now 6. We already know this. Descemet's membrane is the most important layer. I don't think I have to say this. You already know. You have done a whole of the ophthalmology. Like Schwalbe's line is Descemet's membrane. We know the Descemet membrane detachment that can occur. So many times we have studied. We have acute eye drops, the keratoconus. We have desmetocele. Descemet's membrane is having the maximum resistance to the mechanical trauma, chemical trauma, the microorganisms. Okay, and then we have endothelium. Now endothelium is especially important because it is metabolically active layer. What do you mean by that? If I say that it is metabolically active, that means it has a sodium potassium pump. It is responsible for the transparency. Even in NEET 2020 you got this question that which layer of the cornea is responsible for the transparency. So it is the endothelium, okay, because it contains a sodium potassium pump. Now the cells are hexagonal in shape and we require particular number of cells in order to maintain the transparency. So for this we do a test. This test is called as the specular microscopy. So this is again important, specular microscopy. This is a computerized test and you can see here we have got the hexagonal cells. So this will give you the shape of the cells also. This will tell you about the count also, and if the shape is not proper, if the count is less, then you do not have to go for the corneal transplantation. So one important thing is that this is a prerequisite. Specular microscopy is a prerequisite before doing the corneal transplantation, because in the recipient cornea I will have to check whether the endothelium is working fine or not, it is normal or not, and if the count is less than 500 I will not give this cornea to anybody. Okay, so you have to be very, very specific. This is called as a specular microscopy. Then we come to the another instrument. This is a pachymeter. Pachymeter is the one, I think we have studied this along with the tonometers also. This is for the corneal thickness. So we have got a very pointed pen-like instrument, and with the help of this pointed one we can just take the thickness of wherever exact area where you are touching. It can be a central corneal thickness, it can be a peripheral corneal thickness, because both are different. Okay. Now coming to the other instrument, see this one is your keratometer. This we had studied in the SRK formula also. This is the keratometer. Keratometer is used for the corneal curvature, and this I had already shown you. This is the biometer. Biometer is used for the calculation of the IOL power. So these were the instruments. Now coming to the keratitis, we first talk about the bacterial keratitis, which is most common. Now there is always a problem with most common, so I have written it separately, that if they are asking in the word, the answer is Staph aureus. If they are asking specifically in India, then your answer is the Streptococcus pneumoniae. Now, if I talk about the usual mechanism, how actually bacteria will cause bacterial ulcers, so always remember that there are two steps involved here. The first thing is that there will be bacterial, there will be corneal erosion, and then there will be secondary bacterial infection. Now, this corneal erosion can be due to the fingernail trauma, it can be any other penetrating trauma, it can be due to any abrasion, it can be due to the corneal dystrophy. Anything that is abrading the corneal surface can invite the bacteria. Now, some bacteria are even smarter and they can invade the intact cornea. I have given you the whole list there. There are so many bacteria which can invade the normal corneal epithelium, and in those cases, when we have the conjunctivitis, like one example was Neisseria gonorrhoeae, there we have the risk of corneal ulcer also, so they are considered to be more virulent. Apart from this, we usually have first erosion and then the bacterial infection. Okay, now once the bacterial infection is started, it follows 4 stages. First is polymorphonuclear infiltration, means in response to that bacteria, our host defense will start showing the inflammatory reaction and there will be collection of the neutrophils. And then the bacterial ulceration will start. Now, this ulceration starts always from the outermost layers, means superficial layers, and they are going towards the deeper layers. The superficial layers, like we have epithelium, then it will go to the Bowman's membrane. Now, once it has reached to the stroma, which is more than 90% of the thickness, it has reached about 3/4 of the cornea, then the predesmens membrane. Now, only thing that can stop it from going inside and causing the frank perforation is the Descemet's membrane. So here comes the word what is called as the descemetocele. Descemetocele. Cele means a cavity. So here the Descemet's membrane can herniate and it can stop the microorganism going from inside. That stage is called as impending perforation. This stage is called as the impending perforation. Impending perforation means where anytime it can go into perforation, but it is not allowed by the Descemet's membrane. So at this time, the patient should be admitted. We should not leave the patient for OPD treatment because this is a very delicate stage. Anytime if there is an increase in the intra-abdominal pressure, coughing, straining, constipation, lifting heavy weights, bending, excessive anything, this can lead to frank perforation. And no matter how many times you tell this to the patients, they will not restrict their activities until they have a fracture. So it's always better to admit them. We always give them prophylactically cough syrups also, laxatives, and they are obviously prone to bed rest in the hospital. They will not be picking any heavy weights there. So everything that is done, and even sometimes in spite of this they can go into frank perforation. So this is how the staging can be done. Now if you look at the typical bacterial ulcer, how will this patient present? See, bacteria are actually always known for their vascularization, for their intense reaction. So usually we get a single ulcer. We do not have multiple ulcers in cases of bacteria. One thing, this is important. Second important thing, we have lot of congestion, lot of vascularization, and that is why it is a painful condition. And usually the patient presents to the ophthalmologist because of pain. So pain is the predominant symptom because of the nerve involvement, and earliest to come is obviously the photophobia. Whenever we have inflammation, the first thing that comes is always photophobia, and then pain becomes very, very predominant. You will get a single ulcer. Now what happens, suppose these were the corneal layers, okay. Now slowly and gradually the infection is creeping in. It will go to the inner structures also. So now what is happening? The inflammation is coming from the outer layers and it is going in. So it will cause the inflammation of this iris as well as the anterior part of the ciliary body. And what it is called as? It is called as the iridocyclitis or anterior uveitis. So basically this iridocyclitis is also responsible for the ciliary spasm and the pain that the patient is having. So we can have all the features, signs and symptoms of anterior uveitis in this patient who is having the bacterial ulcer, and that is why we also have the exudates here. So due to these exudates, they will be settling at the bottom. We have got this, what is called as the hypopion. So that is why we also have this hypopion. Now there are two important things about this hypopion. The hypopion which is found in the bacteria is always sterile and always mobile. There are two important things that we are getting here. The hypopion of the bacteria is always sterile and always mobile. The reason is same, that it does not have the hyphae. Bacteria does not have anything by which it can penetrate inside these pus cells or the exudates. That is why it is mobile also, and it is sterile also. Sterile means it does not contain any microorganism, and that is why the surgical dictum that pus anywhere in the body should be drained does not hold good for the bacterial hypopions. It is sterile, it does not have any invasion, so it is mobile. So if the patient is bending, the exudates will also bend to one side. When he come back, it will come back again, falling down due to the gravity. So these are very important things. Second important thing is that there are two bacteria which are producing the most dangerous hypopions. The most dangerous hypopions are produced by pneumococcus and pseudomonas. If both are given, ma'am, then you have to choose the pneumococcus. Now, what is the reason? The reason is that the pneumococcus always produce the hypopion. Now, because it always produce the hypopion, what we have done, we have given the name of hypopion corneal ulcer. Because they always produce the hypopions, what we say? We say that it is a hypopion corneal ulcer because it always produces hypopion. Now, other bacteria can also produce hypopion. Then I will say it is a corneal ulcer with hypopion. What is the difference? There is no such difference, but the only difference is that it always produces hypopion, and that is why to give it a separate name, we call it as hypopion corneal ulcer. Another important thing, this is also called as the ulcus serpens. It is also called as ulcus serpens. Ulcus means ulcer, serpens means snake-like. So this is producing a snake-like ulcer, growing in a serpiginous fashion, snake-like fashion from the periphery towards the center. That is why whenever you get in the question the term hypopion corneal ulcer or the ulcus serpens, always go with the pneumococcus. So that is very, very important. Okay, now as far as the complications are concerned, complications are based on the perforation. So if the perforation is very, very small, then we get what you called as adherent leukoma. Then we get the adherent leukoma. Now, what is this adherent leukoma? Adherent leukoma is occurring whenever we have a small perforation. Suppose this is the cornea, okay, and these are the layers, and here we have the iris. Iris I'll draw with the brown, okay. So here this is the iris. Now, suppose there is a small perforation in this part. So what will happen? This iris will go and it will seal this corneal perforation. So you are able to see a very pinch of iris which has sealed that corneal perforation. Adherent means due to the adhesion. Leukoma. Leuco means white and oma means opacity. So due to the adhesion of the iris, due to the sealing by the iris, the small perforation of the cornea has been converted into opacity. This is called as adherent leukoma. So you are able to get the you are not able to see much of the iris there, but you are just seeing the opacity. That is called as the adherent leukoma. But if the perforation is larger, then you are able to see this kind of thing where you are able to see the iris coming outside. This will be called as the iris prolapse. So iris prolapse is actually considered to be a sequelae of a larger one. Okay. Then see this. This is a case of the anterior staphyloma. This is called as anterior staphyloma. Anterior staphyloma is occurring due to the large perforation. Now I will tell you how this is occurring. Suppose these are the corneal layers. Okay. Let's draw it somewhat here. These are the corneal layers, and we are getting the perforation. Now because we are having the perforation, that means inflammation was very large and it was coming to the layers. So this is the aqueous humor here, and we have lot of inflammation. These inflammatory cells are there, and suddenly we get the perforation. Now suddenly when you get the perforation, what will happen? This layers will go on and whole of the aqueous humor will come out. When this aqueous humor has come out, the inflammatory cells will also come out, and now what will happen? Inflammatory cells will make a covering over this. Okay, so this covering forms a kind of a pseudo cornea, because what will happen, as soon as there is a total perforation, there will be prolapse of the iris. So iris has come out and whole of the aqueous humor has also come out, and these cells have made a layer over the iris. So this is actually called as the false cornea, because actually it is not cornea, but it is forming a layer over the iris. That is why it is called as false cornea. Now you always know that whenever there is inflammation, there is always fibrosis. Okay, so now over this, what will happen? The fibrosis will take place, and this, because fibrotic tissue is yellowish white, so I am drawing it by this. Now a fibrotic band has taken place, fibrosis has taken place over this. So this is now called as the pseudo cornea. Okay, both pseudo cornea and false cornea means the same. So any of the following you can say. So one layer is formed by the exudation and another is taken by the fibrosis, but actually it is not cornea, and it is not able to take up the pressure that is being taken by the aqueous humor. So when it becomes very, very high, the whole of the pressure will protrude the cornea anteriorly. So this will come anteriorly like this. It will become like this, and the cells will also come like this. So when whole of the cornea is actually protruded anteriorly, a bunch of grape-like appearance is formed. This is actually called as anterior staphyloma. Staphyloma means the bunch of grape appearance. Here we have covered the sclera also, because not too many things are asked from the sclera. One thing is the blue sclera that we had covered with the congenital glaucoma. Another important thing is the staphyloma. Staphyloma means whenever we have the ectasia in the outermost fibrous layer of the eyeball. So this fibrous layer consists of cornea and the sclera. So in the adherent, in the perforation of the cornea, we have got this anterior staphyloma. Here we have the ectasia of the cornea. While in optics we had studied about the posterior staphyloma in the myopia, high myopia. There we were having the ectasia of the sclera. So it can be anterior staphyloma, which is anterior to the equator, and posterior staphyloma is posterior to the equator. Okay. If it is equatorial staphyloma, that means it is exactly at the equator. If the ectasia is taking place just at the equator, then that is called as the equatorial. Then similarly, we can have ciliary staphyloma. If it is in the area of ciliary body, it can be intercalary staphyloma if it is taking place at the root of the iris. So, but most of the times they ask about the anterior and posterior staphyloma. Anterior, bunch of grape appearance, that is in the perforation of cornea, and posterior staphyloma that you get in high myopia. Okay, now we come to the fungal corneal ulcer. Now see, what is the basic difference when you have to do the questions related to the corneal ulcer? You have been asked any question. There are 2 to 3 things that you should always think about. First of all, look at the appearance, whether it is reddish, whether it is grayish, whether it is dendritic, whether it is ring abscess. Second thing, pain. If it is painful, most probably it's a bacterial one. If it is painless, most probably it is fungal. Third thing, vascularization. The vascularization is completely absent in the fungal corneal ulcers. They are typically called as silent ulcers. Most of the time, patient does not know even that he has an ulcer, and he is presenting just for the diminution of vision. On examination, we find that there is a large ulcer. Now, what is the reason? Reason is again the absence of the vascularization. Because there is no vascularization, that is why we typically get the grayish white ulcer with the elevated margins, dry looking, and we have got the multiple hyphae, because fungus always have hyphae. So we have the finger-like projections, multiple satellite lesions are also present. These are also called as the feathery margins, the rolled out edges. See this is a typical feathery margins or the rolled margins. These are also called as the feathery margins. So if you are getting a grayish ulcer, creamy infiltrate, dry looking, absence of vascularization, multiple satellite lesions, think about the fungal corneal ulcer. Second thing, the mode of injury is usually the vegetative trauma. So if they say a person, farmer by occupation, rural background, wooden stick, animal tail, injudicious use of antibiotics and steroids, again think of fungal corneal ulcer. Specifically, signs are much more than the symptoms. So if they are telling you much more about the signs, if they are giving you history of vegetative trauma, then always think about the fungal corneal ulcer. So it is grayish, dry looking, rolled out margins. We have got multiple satellite lesions. We have got the feathery margins, immune ring of Wesley. So a demarcation line between the healthy cornea and the ulcerative cornea is formed by the inflammatory cells. Vascularization is absent. Symptoms are very, very less. But usually we get a big hypopyon. So that is important. Usually a big hypopyon is present. And as I told you that bacterial hypopyons were always sterile and always mobile. So here always remember that these hypopyons are non-sterile. Now this will be opposite. These will be non-sterile and they are non-mobile. So this is another thing that will help you differentiate between a fungal hypopyon and a bacterial hypopyon. Why it is non-sterile? Because we know that they have a hyphae. They can penetrate inside the exudates. So that will not be sterile, and that becomes non-mobile. It is fixed because it has been infiltrated. So even when the patient is moving, this hypopyon will not move. Now once you have made the diagnosis, treatment is same, just supportive treatment will be same. Just instead of the antibiotics, we have to give the antifungals. The most common one are the filamentous fungi, especially the aspergillus. So for that we are giving natamycin. For the other one, like we have got the yeast-like fungus like Candida and Cryptococcus, there we are giving the amphotericin B along with the nystatin. So first important thing is how to differentiate between the bacterial as well as the fungal hyphae. Now the third is your viral. Whenever we are talking about the viral, always remember that there are two viruses which are very, very specifically causing the corneal ulcers. That is your herpes simplex as well as herpes zoster. Now the viral infections are causing two important things that will help you to differentiate that it's a viral ulcer. First is your keratic precipitates. They were very, very specific of anterior uveitis, but you can get KPs in the viral corneal ulcer. And second is the decreased corneal sensations. So whenever they are talking about the decreased corneal sensations, always remember that it's a viral ulcer. The reason is that these virus remain dormant in the trigeminal ganglions, and that is why after causing the primary infection, they can also cause the recurrent infection. They become dormant there, and whenever there is opportunity, they will come back, and that is why they are presenting with the decreased corneal sensations. So first I'll talk about the herpes simplex. As the name says, it is simplex. It is a simple bacteria causing less problems in comparison to the herpes zoster. if there is a primary infection, they are only causing the problems in conjunctiva as well as the corneal epithelium, while in the recurrent they will be going in the deeper also. So in the primary infection, the first thing that they are causing is this SPK, superficial punctate keratitis. Can you see there are so many lesions that you are getting in the cornea, small micro erosions on the cornea. Why they are green in color? Because we have stained with the fluorescein. Fluorescein stain is the most common stain that we are using in the cornea, so we are staining with the fluorescein. That is why you are getting the greenish color, small erosions. This is called as SPK. If you talk about the conjunctivitis, it is usually the follicular conjunctivitis that we are getting. Now when there are recurrent lesions, then they are causing the problem in epithelium also, stroma also. So again, what kind of lesion they are causing? Now first see this is the typical lesion which is caused by the herpes simplex. Can you see we have got tree like arborizing pattern like this, and then the typical knobs are also present. This is very important. Knobs are very specifically present. This is called as the dendritic ulcer. This is called as the dendritic ulcer, where we have the dendrites, and these knobs should be present. If these knobs are not present, then this is called as pseudodendrite. That also I will show you. Now if you see the staining pattern, these knobs are actually stained by the rose bengal stain, while this is the floor. Now F for F, so floor is stained by the fluorescein. Okay, so if they ask you the stains, F, that is floor, is stained by the fluorescein, knobs are stained by the rose bengal, and can you see these are the knobs here we have present. So this is the typical dendritic ulcer. The typical dendritic ulcer that you get in herpes simplex. Again, a very important question, and here steroids are contraindicated. You have to give 3% acyclovir eye ointment. Steroids are contraindicated because if you give the steroids, what will happen? All these knobs will coalesce and a larger ulcer will be formed. So this larger ulcer which is formed, it is something like this. This is called as the amoeboid ulcer. Right here, this is called as the amoeboid ulcer, or it is also called as the geographical ulcer. The amoeboid ulcer or the geographical ulcer, like this, a larger ulcer is formed. So if you are giving by mistake also the steroids, next time you will see the patient, he will come up with a larger ulcer. So that means that was a dendritic ulcer. So you have to be very careful. Okay, now I was telling you about the pseudodendritic pattern. See, this is actually your pseudodendrite. See, there are no knobs here. So because you do not have any knobs, this is called as pseudodendritic pattern. This pseudodendritic pattern can be found in herpes zoster also. It can be found in acanthamoeba also. So you should be very careful that knobs are present or not. Okay, then coming to the next one. Next is your herpes zoster. Now herpes zoster is a more virulent virus. Here again you can have the decreased corneal sensations, you will have the KPs, but there are certain things which are very different from herpes simplex. First of all, can you see here, there is a strict distribution on one side of the forehead, because you know which nerve is involved? Trigeminal. Now trigeminal has three divisions. It is like this: ophthalmic, maxillary and mandibular. Now out of this, which is involved? It is the ophthalmic division. Now from this ophthalmic division, again we have got three divisions. Again, take your hand like this. So we have frontal this, then we have lacrimal, and then we have nasociliary. Now this virus is affecting all the three divisions in the same order. Means first is the frontal, then is the lacrimal, and then is the nasociliary. So first we are getting the frontal skin eruptions, then we are getting the ocular involvement, and then we are getting the eruptions on the tip of the nose and the side of the nose. Now based on this, we have a rule called as the Hutchison rule. Hutchison rule says that if there are eruptions on the tip of the nose, side of the nose, then there are more chances of ocular involvement, because the nasociliary division is involved after this lacrimal one. Okay, plus you will get strict distribution on one side of the forehead. It's a very, very painful condition. First, the patient presents with the general features. We have fever, high grade fever, chills and rigors, and the second very, very important thing is the intense trigeminal neuralgia. So you have lot of pain in whole of the distribution of this three divisions. Even before the appearance of the eruptions, you know that which area will show eruptions, because there is lot of pain, and that pain is unbearable, because you know neural pain is always the worst kind of pain. So after this 3 to 4 days, the patients start having the eruptions, and usually the eruptions will lead to intensification of pain, and then slowly and gradually it is causing the anesthesia dolorosa, means then there will be decrease in the sensations. That is called as anesthesia dolorosa. Okay, so first we have got the general features, then we have the cutaneous features, and finally we have ocular involvement. Now in the ocular involvement, it is causing the inflammation in every part, starting from the conjunctivitis, we have keratitis, we have uveitis, we have secondary glaucomas, then we have optic neuritis, motor encephalitis, even the cranial nerve palsies. Cranial nerve palsies are also very, very common. Now the conjunctivitis will be again the follicular type, but if I talk about the keratitis, here dendritic pattern is not found. Dendritic pattern not found. We can have what you call as pseudodendrites. So pseudodendritic pattern can be found, can be present, but true dendritic pattern is found always in herpes simplex. Now dendritic keratitis was typical of herpes simplex. What is typical in herpes zoster? In the herpes zoster, it is this nummular keratitis, where we are getting the coin shaped areas, just like this. Coin shaped areas of the stromal inflammation, disc like areas are present, surrounded by the haziness. This is called as nummular keratitis. This is very, very typical of herpes zoster. Then I have given you list also what are the other things that you can get here. Okay, and there, like, we have nummular keratitis, we have stromal keratitis, interstitial keratitis, disciform keratitis. You can add pseudodendritic pattern, plus minus can be present, but I have specifically mentioned that sclerokeratitis is least common. That does not mean that it will not show sclerokeratitis. It can show, but if they are giving you like 4 patterns, then which one is least likely to occur? That is sclerokeratitis, and that was a question also in which you people were getting confused. Okay, then there is a thing called as the neural keratitis. Here the cranial nerve involvements are again common. So there are 2 things. One is called as the neurotrophic. One is called as the neurotrophic and another is the neuroparalytic. Now many times there is a confusion. I don't think there is a confusion here. See, trophic means what? Trophic means sensory. Now what is the sensory supply? The 5th nerve. So here we have trigeminal palsy, paralysis. Paralysis is occurring, it means the motor involvement. So paralysis is in the orbicularis oculi muscle. Orbicularis oculi. Orbicularis oculi helps in the closure of the eyelid. This is supplied by the facial nerve. Okay, so whenever we have neuroparalytic, there is a problem in the facial nerve. Whenever we have neurotrophic problem in the trigeminal. Now suppose orbicularis oculi muscle is paralyzed, person is not able to close the eyelid. So what can happen? Exposure keratitis. So whether they ask you neuroparalytic or they ask you the exposure keratitis, your answer will be same, facial nerve palsy. Okay, now here, because you are having so many systemic features also, that is why you will see that the treatment is also very, very elaborative. Here we give the systemic acyclovir, also topical acyclovir, antibiotic steroid ointment for the eruptions. Even patient goes into depression because pain is unbearable, and many times for years after the acute attack also patient is having pain. So for that we are using amitriptyline for the depression, and for the post-herpetic neuralgia that you are having, we can even give the systemic steroids. So there are so many things that we give here. Now finally we come to the acanthamoeba. Acanthamoeba keratitis. Now first of all, cleared this confusion that the most common infection in the contact lens users is not acanthamoeba, it is Pseudomonas. But the most common risk factor of acanthamoeba keratitis is the use of contact lenses. Now what happens, acanthamoeba is actually a free living amoeba which is present in the soil. It does not require men to complete its life cycle. It actually by accidentally reaches the man and then it completes its life cycle there. Now how it can reach the men? By the use of contaminated solutions. So if you are using the contaminated solutions for washing the contact lenses, expired solutions, homemade solutions, saline solutions, just the tap water or the soiled water, then this acanthamoeba manages to remain between the surface of the contact lens and the cornea. So it is actually enveloping the cornea, whole of the surface, and that is why, can you see, whole of the cornea becomes ulcerative. This is the ring abscess that you get in cases of acanthamoeba. I have stained this, so whole of the cornea has become green. That means ulcer is present in all over the cornea, and because it is actually causing the keratoneuritis, it is involving the inflammatory deposits are involving the radial divisions of the corneal nerve. That is why it is very, very painful. Like bacterial ulcers are also painful, but here pain is out of the proportion to the amount of the ulcer. So when pain is present in proportion to the ulcer, it is bacterial. When no pain is present, it is fungal. When decreased corneal sensations are present, it is viral. And when pain is out of the proportion of the ulcer, then it is the acanthamoeba, especially if there is a history of contact lens use. Now there are so many confusing things that you may be confused that this is acanthamoeba or this is bacterial, fungal, viral. So let us see them one by one. First of all, you can have the pseudodendritic pattern. Now instead of writing pseudodendrites in the question, they may say dendrites are seen. So this is one thing that you may get confused with the viral. Second important thing, they can say trauma with the vegetative matter. Trauma with the vegetative matter gives you a clue towards fungal. Now trauma from the vegetative matter can cause fungal also, and it can cause acanthamoeba also, because that vegetative matter may be soiled. Third thing, you can also get the macrophages in this question. Macrophages actually are present in the bacterial ulcer. What happens? The trophozoites, that is the active stage of the acanthamoeba, that looks like macrophages, and therefore in the question they say macrophages are also seen. So if a question says that we are having the dendritic pattern also, trauma from the vegetative matter also, we are seeing macrophages, now you can get confused with whole of the three ulcers. Now how to make sure that what kind of ulcer it is? So if they say the growth is on non-nutrient agar enriched with E. coli, then 100% sure that this is actually acanthamoeba. So in such kind of questions, you will always see that they will always write. See, I have given you this also, that what are the confusing things: pseudodendrites, trophozoites, and diagnostic is the culture on non-nutrient agar. Then another important thing, what is the treatment of choice? See, treatment of choice is actually the combination. If both are given, then that is best. Okay, polyoxamethylene biguanide along with the propamidine. But if you have to choose one, you have to go with the polyoxamethylene biguanide. So this was about the infectious ulcers. Now next, coming to the non-infectious ulcers. In the non-infectious ulcers, we first come with the band-shaped keratopathy. Can you see here? We have a whole this band-shaped structure which is present covering the cornea. This is called as band-shaped keratopathy. It is actually occurring due to the calcium deposition. Now B for band and B for Bowman's membrane, and after we come C, so C is the calcium deposition. So band-shaped keratopathy is due to the calcium deposition in the Bowman's membrane. So obviously those conditions where we have more of calcium, we have vitamin D toxicity, hypercalcemia, sarcoidosis, chronic keratitis, chronic uveitis, all these things are very, very important. Especially the causes are very important for the band-shaped keratopathy. This band starts from the limbus and eventually it merges in the center. And for the treatment, you will give the chelating agents, EDTA, and if that is not helping, we can do the keratectomy. Okay. Then the next, this is very, very important. This is a case of the keratoconus. Keratoconus, I have written AD. AD means autosomal dominant. Usually it is an autosomal dominant condition, and it is more common in males. It is non-inflammatory. It is bilateral, and there is ectasia of the cornea. So this conical ectasia of the cornea is actually leading to two things. There is increase in the axial length. So due to this conical protrusion, there will be increase in the axial length of the cornea. Due to increase in the axial length, this patient will develop myopia, and obviously there is uneven surface. So along with this, the patient will also have the irregular kind of astigmatism. So recently I had posted a question also on this, that what kind of refractive status this patient is expected to have. This patient is expected to have the myopia, usually high degrees of myopia, along with the irregular astigmatism. This is a case of keratoconus. Now see, this is a sign which you see in a patient of keratoconus. This is called as the Munson sign. Munson sign means, if I ask this patient to look in the downward gaze, so what will happen, the conical part of this cornea will cause the localized bulging of this lower eyelid. So the localized bulging of the lower eyelid, which is occurring due to the protrusion by the apices of this conical cornea, this is called as the Munson sign. We also get the Fleischer's ring, that is your iron deposition at the base of the cone. We get the oil droplet reflex. When you see it, what happens, this tip of the cornea, this gives you a oil droplet reflex. Oil droplet cataract is found in the galactosemia. So again you get the same names, oil droplet reflex and oil droplet cataract. This is important. And what happens, there can be rupture in the Descemet's membrane due to undue stretching, so that can lead to acute eye drops. The treatment is important because nowadays we are giving a new kind of treatment, like contact lenses. Obviously we can try. Which contact lenses? I told you that the rigid or semi-soft contact lenses are usually preferred because they have a good tolerance effect also, and they have a good refractive value also. We are also decreasing the progression by doing the collagen cross-linking. So if you are doing the cross-linking, obviously the degree of protrusion will be decreasing. This we can do by giving the riboflavin drops. Along with that, we give exposure to the UVA light. So in that sense, this is again important. Then there is a condition called as the cornea verticillata, also called as the vortex keratopathy. Cornea verticillata or the vortex keratopathy. This is can you see the whorl-like deposits? These are the whorl-like deposits that you get in the epithelium, and mostly it is taking place due to the drugs. These drugs you can learn with the help of a pica, and in the reverse order. Means most important is A, that is amiodarone, then is C, chloroquine, then I, indomethacin, and then P is the phenothiazines. So we have got a lot of drugs which were causing the optic neuropathy also. There were a lot of drugs which were causing the cataract. Then there was a bullseye maculopathy by the chloroquine. Chloroquine is a drug which is causing cataract also, toxic optic neuropathy also. It is causing this vortex keratopathy. Most of the time the patients are asymptomatic, but because there are scratches over the cornea, there can be a glare sometimes in the patient. So you have to be careful about this. This is called as the vortex keratopathy. Then one more condition that I have given is the photoophthalmia. Photoophthalmia means this is occurring by the light. Usually it occurs by the UV radiations, because these UV radiations will be reflected from the surface of the snow. So this is also called as snow blindness. And prophylactically we can give the Crookes glasses, but if it is occurring, we can give the cold compresses, antibiotic ointment, then padding and bandaging. You can go for it. Similarly, we have got a Moran's ulcer. Moran's ulcer is also called as rodent ulcer. It is also called as a chronic serpiginous ulcer. Serpiginous, again, it is a snake-like ulcer starting from the periphery going towards the center. So here what it is going, it is making burrows, digging similar to the rodents. So it is not causing through and through perforation. Every layer it is making burrows, and then it is going. That is why it is very, very painful. We have got the advancing borders, overhanging margins. It's a painful ulcer, but perforation is rare because it is not going through and through. So these are the important things about the Murin's ulcer. Then we have talked about the corneal transplantation. See, corneal transplantation or keratoplasty can be of two types. It can be partial thickness, it can be total thickness. Means lamellar keratoplasty or the penetrating keratoplasty. Penetrating keratoplasty means the total one. Now nowadays we are preferring the lamellar so that we can preserve the other layers for the other people. So this lamellar can be anterior lamellar or it can be posterior lamellar. The posterior lamellar can again be divided the desic and the demic. So this may we are getting the S. There you are involving the stroma also. So there I am giving the stroma, the Descemet's membrane and the endothelium. You can easily remember this. And the DMAC. So here I do not have S. So here I do not involve the stromas. This is for the Descemet's membrane and the endothelium. Endothelial losses are also less, like in anterior lamella the endothelial loss is just 20 to 30%, while the stroma one, this is giving a loss of 30 to 40%, while if I am doing the penetrating keratoplasty, the total ones, so obviously there the endothelial loss will be more, about 50 to 60%. Then I've given you a list of the contraindications. There are certain contraindications which are the absolute ones where you should not do the corneal transplantation. The infections, like we have HIV, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, if there is a tumor, if there is a death due to unknown origin, septicemia, rabies. So these are the things where you should not do the keratoplasty. I have given you a list of the preservating agents, short term, intermediate and long term. This is required because many a times when we are collecting the cornea, usually it's best to collect within 6 hours, but maximum you can do up to 24 hours. Maybe at that time when you are coming at odd hour in the night, you don't have anything there to preserve it. So at that time we can keep it in a moist chamber plus 4 degrees Celsius right in our refrigerators too. But after that, for the intermediate, like up to 14 days, we can send them to the respective place in the culture mediums. McCarry-Kaufman medium is considered to be the best medium for the cornea. Then we have Optisol, chondroitin sulfate, and if you feel like that you have to store it for the longer periods, then go for the cryopreservation organ transplant method. Now cryopreservation, you must have seen that Krish in Hrithik Roshan wala Krish, in which the father Hrithik Roshan, he was also kept in the museum in the cryopreserved form. So that is a very good movie if you want to see that cryopreservation. There what would happen, that father Hrithik Roshan was preserved. So there we were using his mind for the scans. They were using his retina scans to as a password for their computer opening, and they were using his mind to build those softwares, but they had preserved the other tissues, the limbs part, and that was not used. So that was a very good example of cryopreservation. Then I have given you the staging of vitamin A deficiency, though it is covered in the PSM part, but still because it was relevant to the ophthalmology, I have given you the change that is occurring. The first change that is occurring in the cirrhosis is the hyperkeratosis that I told you, is the change from the non-keratinized epithelium to the keratinized epithelium. That was one thing. Second important thing, the earliest symptom. We all know that the earliest symptom of vitamin A deficiency is the night blindness, but even before night blindness something happens, and that is the decreased sensitivity to the green light. So if that is also given, you should first go with that decreased sensitivity to the green light, and then there is night blindness. If they are asking you the earliest sign, then that will be your conjunctival cirrhosis, then is the Bitot spot, then is the corneal xerosis, and ultimately we have corneal ulcer leading to the xerophthalmia. So that is there. Then I have given you the Vision 2020 program. That is your right to sight for 20 by 20 vision. 20 by 20 means 6 by 6 vision. By the year 2020, nobody know that what would happen in 2020, and now we will have to change it because we have not yet achieved that Vision 2020. So there are so many things that are involved. Cataract, that is the most common cause of blindness. Refractive error is the most common cause of low vision in India. Then we involve vitamin A deficiency, that is the most common cause of blindness in children in India. Then trachoma, most common infection causing blindness in India, and that also included the onchocerciasis, but this is not found in India. And that is why instead of this we consider diabetic retinopathy in adults and retinopathy of prematurity in the children. So we are considering this. Then the chemical injuries. See, chemical injuries are very common, especially we have acid injuries, we have alkali injuries. Now the problem is that acid everybody is afraid of and we are using them very carefully, but alkalis we are using day to day in our domestic purposes. So many repellents, aerosols, insecticides, and the pesticides we are using, and we without knowing that they are also risky. And the alkalis are actually having more risk in comparison to the acids. The reason is that they are causing necrosis. They are causing necrosis and therefore they have the risk of perforation. Acids cause the precipitation in the proteins, and that is why they do not have the risk of perforation. They are causing a problem in the epithelium, but they do not have the risk of perforation. So everybody should know, I think everybody, not only the medicos or the interns, everybody should know what is the first aid of chemical injury, alkali injury. First of all, you have to wash it like anything. Intensive irrigation. Even if you are there as an intern and nobody is there, instead of calling first do the irrigation, because call can be done by other person also. A peon can also call, but this you have to do. So by 2 hands, or take the help of your friend to take 2 of the fluids, anything that is available, normal saline, ringer lactate, best is the balanced saline solution, and make 2 pricks, wide bore pricks there, and start giving the fluid with a thrust, so that we are neutralizing the pH till the pH becomes normal. 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, you have to do the intensive irrigation. Then the step number 2 is the eversion. Sometimes we also do the double eversions in order to remove those deeply embedded particles, because very common alkali injury is by the calcium hydroxide, the whitewash, the tuna particles going. So you have to double evert the eyelid in order to remove that tuna particles. Then third, till this time some amount of necrosis obviously must have taken place, so you have to remove that necrotic tissue. This is called as the debridement. Okay, then after the debridement we start giving the drugs. We give the steroids. Now steroids can delay healing. It again has the risk of perforation, but we prefer to give steroids for a short period, so that we are decreasing the inflammation. Then you can start giving the citrates. Citrates have a very good role here: anti-proteolytic, anti-collagenollytic, anti-neutrophilic. So it is acting as an anti-inflammatory, also helping in to prevent the perforation. Then we give the tetracyclines. Tetracyclines basically not as antibiotic here, but they are being given in order to decrease the chances of perforation. So that has a very good activity, the tetracycline, or you can give any other drug of this group like doxycycline can also be given. Then apart from this, for the comfort, we can give cycloplegics because there is so much of pain. Then Another thing, if there is a developing glaucoma along with it, you have to treat for the complications. So many a times they ask you a question that what should not be done at this time. So there the answer is the thorough slit lamp examination, because it's an emergency condition, it's a painful condition. So first you need to do the intervention. Examination can be done at a later time. So you have to give the citrates, you have to do the irrigation, you have to do the debridement, you have to give so many drugs, and you have to treat the complications. After that we can do the slit lamp examination. Okay, so with this we have finished the handouts. I think we have done the effective and detailed interaction and discussion in this. Anything you feel that you have a query, you can always ask for. And please do one thing after you have completed these handouts also. Now do one thing, whatever DDs that we have already covered in ophthalmology, make a list. Okay, don't wait for anybody or for me to prepare a list for you and give. The reason is that when you do the things by yourself, you tend to learn more. If I give you a list, you have to actually ratify that list. But if you prepare that list by yourself, write one DD and then start remembering what are the things where you can find that DD, and start writing the names. And in this way you will be coming up with the effective revision of all the topics. So I hope all the you will be doing very good, and keep revising the things, keep studying. Thank you. Happy ophthalmology.